we past the hour? It's supposed to start at 1, right? All right. Hi, Zoom folks. Don't know if you can hear us. Hopefully you can. Wait, let's just chat. I think we can go through all the things we need to go through. Do we all know each other already? Interloper in the corner.
Yeah, there are folks that I don't know. My name is Will Pfeffer. I am not a student. I worked at BARI for a while. I have an interest in the future of BARI as an organization. So I am.
Will is the one exception of non-student that I thought would be actually an asset to this. Will is not doing himself, he's too humble here. He helped build BARI up from the ground up for several years, actually. So has very intimate knowledge of both BARI, the ins and outs, but also the conference itself. So I thought he might be just a valuable asset to have in this conversation, especially because I can't really fill in the gaps around the conference, like, but Will can. And so hopefully that's okay with folks that he's not a student. So other folks in the room, you want to just do it around the room, and then online people, I think if that computer ends up being unmuted, that's how we can hear. But that's how what we did last time. If that works.
You're providing sound to the
Yes, the last panel session, for some reason it was coming out of that computer, not mine. That worked. Like it didn't come from the when I unmuted. So
yeah, well certainly it would come out of here, yeah.
Okay.
But it just comes out of the laptop, not out of the that should come out of the TV there. But yeah, that's fine.
Cool.
Yeah, let me know whenever you want me to unmute.
Solid, thank you. And Adam, right?
I'm Adam, yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Adam.
Sorry. Yes.
Me. Hi. We're just doing intros.
Oh. My name's Michael. I just came from the ballroom. The nice woman named Giordano, she recommended me to come up here. So just here, check it out.
Nice. Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, hey folks, my name is Alejandro. I also go by Aleja. I'm an MIT grad student. I'm new to the civic data ecosystem, BARI generally, so just here to learn.
I'm Nina. I'm the 4th year undergraduate at Northeastern School of Architecture. It's also my first experience with BARI.
I'm Garrett, PhD candidate here at Northeastern Political Science. Kind of wrapping up my studenthood, but happy to contribute as a kid.
Next on Zoom.
Yeah.
Get or unless you try to say I am. Diane, do you want to introduce yourself? I could. She posted in the chat.
Okay.
Says they work in the library at Eastern, and they're here to listen and open to thoughts in the role the library can play, supporting all of you, whether that's research, preservation of data, dissemination, etc.
Awesome. That's great. Welcome. Do you want to, since you're here?
Yes. My name is Sage. I'm finishing my master's in 6 hours. And I'm a researcher with BARI.
Yay, small group. Because it's a small group, maybe we can all, if you can just get in place, I'm not like gonna ask you to move necessarily, but if you all want to get into a position where you can see each other, so that we can have a conversation. Like a round table. Thanks for showing up. You're here. I'm Kim Lucas. I'm faculty at the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs here at Northeastern. I'm new, just so you know. I don't know a lot. Actually, I do because I've been in Boston for a really long time. I just don't know a lot about Northeastern or how academia works. But you know, so don't ask me those questions. What I do know a lot about is how to help bring in communities and help to engage communities in hard conversations, in conversations about things that are meaningful for them. And so one of the things that we thought we would do during this BARI conference session is really think about how do we involve students in BARI. And so BARI as a Boston area research initiative is like, have y'all been here all morning long? Or like, did you just show up just now? Or like, what's the temperature here?
I showed up.
Nice. Same. Cool.
I've been here since then.
Wowie. Yeah. Wow. You've been here?
I've been here.
Wow, wait, look at that. You've been here.
I've been
Yeah, so. And Diane was just in my session for a little bit, and so I know. So, okay, different temperatures, different flavors. Definitely get food. There's a lot of food in there. Take a couple bags. Definitely bring some foods home. BARI, the Boston Area Research Initiative, is a cross-institutional organization, right? And so it's mostly focused on higher education, but the idea here is to reach across as many colleges and universities as exist in the greater Boston area, and to work with folks who are very specifically working on civic research or civic data projects with the community or with our local governments. So that's what BARI does, broadly speaking. I like to talk about BARI does three big things. So the first thing is the thing you're at right now. It's the conference. Every year for over 10 years at this point, we've done an annual conference. And it used to be, before this year, that the style of doing the conference was like what we call an academic society meeting. So what that looks like is you did some research, you did some work, you show up, you share about it, everyone claps. You get to write that on your CV if you have one, that you did that, we call it a day. This is what academics do, and that's nice for academics. But if we're people who work with, as academics, right, if we're people who work with the community in addressing their problems and thinking about the issues that affect us all, then this year we decided, shouldn't it be more like we all do stuff and we all get something out of it, not just a line on our CVs? And so this year, I don't know if you noticed, or moving forward, hopefully you notice, our conversations are more about how do we all work together and do this. And so it's not necessarily spotlighting a single person or like, yeah, pat on the back, you did good work, academic, but now more about like, okay, but seriously, how do we get something done together? What does that look like? How do we shape these conversations? So that's what the conversation is going on right now. The conversations this morning, hopefully, the conversations later this afternoon will be. One of the things that we've been thinking about is we have always done things with students as part of this conference, but we've never been intentional about it, right? We've always had students like Sage who work with us, but we've never said, okay, beyond that, what does that look like? Or even like, how should we incorporate the student experience into the rest of this conference? We've never said, what do you all want to see? And so this is our opportunity to do that. So thanks for showing up and being part of this conversation. I will say that I did not make the agenda for the day, and so I will just kind of help shepherd us to get to where we want to be. But a lot of folks in this room have contributed, and more actually, who are not in this room, have contributed to developing today's agenda. I'm just here as more like an advisor, facilitator than anything else, which I think is the appropriate role for someone in this room, like myself. That's my intro to BARI, my quasi intro to me. I think I covered all my intro topic points. We were gonna do an icebreaker, but we kind of already did our wrap around. But one of the questions was gonna be around, what's your conference experience? What's that been like so far, if any? Curious. Thoughts? Anybody want to share?
I'll share. I am obviously coming to this with a very particular perspective, but I have found that this is the first BARI conference that I have been able to really fully engage with the topic, because it's the first one that I've been to that I am not either organizing or like it's on Zoom while I'm at work and I'm like trying to tune in the bits of it. So it's been really nice to be able to like be here for the content. And I have found content super engaging. I noticed but didn't have sort of a word for the fact that like the morning session that I went to was a panel of people being asked questions by a wonderful moderator. And it's not just like, here are 3 brief presentations about 3 different research projects in a row, and the moderator is going to try to ask questions and everyone can kind of answer in a fun way.
Thanks, Will.
I think I'm a newbie to the world of conferences. So I just went to my first real one earlier this year, and then this is my second experience. And I would say even just based on the one session that's happened today, this feels like a encouraging step or sort of shift away from the traditional model. And in that, and I think in that goal of bringing people to a table as opposed to just sort of disseminating information in this very top-down manner. I think this is also helpful because I see, the idea is here we have practitioners, people who are on the ground doing the work, and we have researchers who are producing the work. And I think students as a separate entity and not just even student researchers, but just students, because they're at this, sort of pivot moment, going in one of those 2 directions. And so I think it's important to kind of create that triangulation and allow people to learn from each other rather than having this one directional.
I've only been here since June, so it's been brief, but delightful. Will, I'd love to get it. Talk about what BARI does, some of the questions I think it grapples with. One, I think, observation I have is that it's awesome that we're trying to get this more towards students. Right now is also a very busy time for students. This is kind of a semester. I know it's good maybe because they have finals and papers due today. So I don't know what bearing that fact might have on future planning, but to increase your physical attendance, potentially shifting when the semester that's happening could be cheap.
Wow, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just speak from the faculty perspective. I'm like, oh, thank goodness, BARI is not happening when I'm grading. So shift it out a week, and I'm like, in that boat.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Right. Yeah, different. Yeah.
this is why we have this conversation. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I officially have 1 hour of conference experience under my belt.
Oh, nice, solid.
And basically, it's been nice. I'm in that phase where I'm just trying to figure out what exactly I want to do once I get out of graduate school. It's very easy to map out your career when you say stuff like I want to be a doctor. When you say I want to major in public policy, I got the same reaction every time. What's that? So, based on what I've seen so far, I'm glad I came here. It gives me, a better sense of direction than I had yesterday.
Nice. Well, good. Well, this is a great. Hope we don't ruin that trajectory. The solid experience for the last hour is probably a high mark. So I'm trying not to mess that trajectory up. See, since you're in here, now I broke you into this conversation.
I've experienced the kind of one-way version of this conference and other conferences, and to me, a conference it's all about the connection and conversation, and that feeling that you suddenly see the very community of people that you hear about. That's this researchers and practitioners and public private partnerships and all this, and it's there. But then your actual experience is going to the classroom and just being a student and maybe doing some research. But you see, it's you're kind of always waiting. When is that going to happen? When you come to a spot like this, you realize oh, everyone's kind of waiting for that. Like we're all trying to figure out, and when we are here, we're like, oh, look at all these people, we all want to do this. Let me talk to some of them, or just join a session and see. So I think that that experience is nice that we're doing that, and also to not feel like you're out of touch, because the whole idea that this is a new effort is because it's not like how academia typically works. It's not how it's incentivized.
Yeah.
But it's what we care about. So like we care about the impact, we care about the connections and things. So I think recognizing, at least for myself, and hopefully others feel that way too, that like we have kind of an equal opportunity to go into those new directions,
Thanks, everybody.
Wait, let me see if anyone is-
Nope, yep.
is,
Any other quick stuff?
no, keep going.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, I'm gonna toss it over to Garrett. Garrett,
Yeah, so we weren't sure how many people were going to be here today, so we have a whiteboard exercise.
what's your conference experience?
What's that?
What's your conference experience?
Oh, my conference experience. Sorry. My conference experience has been, over the last few years, quite the bag of virtual events, but also very purely academic conferences where everyone is kind of submit your paper to a panel, or maybe someone hosting a panel. Sometimes people will just read off their paper. Sometimes they'll have slides and they present their paper that they're going to try to publish in a journal. There's a discussing, they give feedback, and sometimes the papers aren't even related to each other at all. So it's just like this very loose connection. Oh, they're both somewhat related to climate change. This one's more social resilience. This one's engineering hard infrastructure and the funding of it through various policies. So having this sort of BARI conference where we're actually in person and bringing together community members is a breath of fresh air compared to political science conferences, American Political Science Association or Southern Political Science Association, or any of these sorts of very academically focused. So that's a plus. Another plus is actually being to a conference in person again versus the last 2 years of being on Zoom. Just being in a place with other like-minded people really helps, I think, instead of just sitting in my home in Boston in a conference that was like supposed to be in Chicago or Texas or wherever the conference was supposed to be that year. So just that sort of proximity effect really helps contextualize why we're even here to begin with. And it's good to be like back in person after attending a few conferences or my career person been on it. So much appreciated for having BARI actually host people.
Nice. All right. Well, Garrett has stepped up to help kind of co-facilitate this, and actually, this is the part where you take the wheel.
Yes, I was going to take the wheel earlier prematurely. So yeah, we have this kind of some exercise we developed. They have Kim and some others over the last few weeks trying to think of the future of conferences, relationship with students, especially BARI, and how is BARI, what do students want out of BARI, and what can we do with BARI to really push student involvement further. So we have these whiteboard exercises. I guess these are our whiteboards today, Kim. We can still use them, maybe as a note taker, but since there's just kind of less of us overall in the room, a discussion is also fine. But this discussion, we kind of have 3 phases that we've been thinking of. Where we are today, which we've kind of touched on a little bit with our conference experience. Where we want to get to, so what do we want to get out of conferences like BARI and our involvement with BARI and its overall goal of it involving the community. And then the third one, how do we get there? What are the kind of more action-y steps that we can take to come from where we are to where we want to go? And helping develop this BARI Student Committee to go forward into not just next year, but into the future of wherever BARI goes. So I think we have the slides for the first discussion question.
you. Don't mind this. I go rogue sometimes. Okay. So, there we go.
So trying to think of where we're going. We also spoke about our experiences with conferences, academic or BARI or conferences in general. But where are we coming from? Particularly, what are some of the barriers or obstacles for involvement in conferences? Is it some sort of resource that you don't have? Is there some sort of informational thing? Maybe that is a resource. Is it faculty support? Is it community support? Is it another resource, maybe financial support? Any other sort of obstacle, maybe resource in terms of connections between you and, you know, a research question or a problem set? So what are the barriers and obstacles that are keeping us from getting to where we want to go? What are some of the things that you've experienced that might inhibit your conference experiences over the past few years, or what you can see maybe going into the future as your academic careers continue?
I could say like a super basic level in regards to BARI, like this is my fourth year at Northeastern, and I did not know BARI was a thing until this year. Which, you know, maybe I just need to have my head in the sand, but I think there's also something to just this sort of baseline accessibility and communication. And we've had some deep discussions about like not just saying like everyone can come, but like actively encouraging people, because I think, and especially at sort of lower levels, like at the undergraduate stage, like conferences feel like a place where like you can go bringing your knowledge and, you know, vast expertise, which, you know, as students, like we don't necessarily have, which is like to the same degree. So I think like finding and like advocating that there's a role for students and that it can be a mutual exchange, that students will get things out of attending these conferences, and also that they're bringing something to the table that other participants don't necessarily have.
Thanks for taking notes, Kim. Before I came out to the room between finishing for the start of the conference, I went outside to get some fresh air. Tons of students walking by, and why weren't they coming here? Do they not know about what's going on upstairs?
I had to like go ask someone at the front. Like there's no indication on the first floor of this building what's happening up here today. I had to go ask someone to know. Like yeah, proximal likely what's happening on campus. Like I'm sure there's various organs and information dissemination available, but like walking around, I have no idea what's happening unless they like can't do the next one.
Yeah, someone else mentioned that here to me. They were here, like they're the first person here.
Yeah.
And they said they were just like wandering around.
Yeah.
But that was somebody who was like very aware of happening and was actively trying to get here like an hour early.
Yeah.
And struggled to find it. So people who are only kind of.
I really appreciate the phrase that Sage used earlier around the incentive systems in academia. This is a snapshot based on the few folks I've met in BARI so far, so it's anecdotal, but it does seem like there's much emphasis on community engagements, pertaining to data or otherwise, in the types of research I've met at BARI. And I think one thing to call out is that like a lot of academia is not designed to engage outside of academia. So I think that there's distinct strength in what BARI could one day become, where it's like, this is kind of the unique support system, either as a researcher profession or personally, how you think about the research you do, and the fact that it's not really clear in the academic system where you go from there. So like, again, that's like a really big goal, like all like steps to get there, but I think it's one distinct like value that BARI seems to hold in my experience that I think could really be invested in.
Put down, not barrier.
Well, I could almost say that in a barrier way, which is that not a myth, but like a thing that people say a lot in academia is that there's, oh, you're an academic, well, that means you don't work in the real world. There's like this basic accepting that like to be in academia is to siphon one off into the ivory tower, into somewhere, some version of work and meaning career that is not what everyone else is doing in the real world. Which is obviously an extremely inhibiting thought. And there are people who become academics because you are isolated in a way. You actually can operate in a way that's like way more mission driven, way more individual, you know, but like it still stands that when you join an institution that is said to be not attached to the real world and then spend every day saying, how do we work in the real world? It's like, well, maybe you should. And then some people leave academia because they're like, I gotta get into the real world and you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a very, like just a whole frame of work.
It's kind of an assumption.
Yeah.
Oh, you're getting a master's PhD, you must want to just be a teacher or
Yeah.
a professor. You know, I want to like do applied research. I want to
Yeah.
public policy.
Yeah.
Really use what I've learned for a positive good, other than I'm teaching. But outside of education, there's plenty of applications that people just don't see.
Yes.
And this could be, I'm sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
I say like this, to try to counter this can also maybe be a way of opposing that preconception and this sort of like almost negative self-selection into academia, or like maybe, I mean, I do think a lot of people like genuinely like, you know, are interested in outcomes, but like maybe you're also saying like you should only be in academia if you just kind of want to like sit around and shout into the void. So I think for this being a way for people to see that like you can make these connections, that you can, you know, create meaningful, impactful research when you are able to engage with these people who are doing the work on the ground, that it can be a more sort of nuanced and about these like deep relationships and not just operating in these totally distinct spaces.
Question from Joe, or a suggestion for this conversation from Joe Fitzgerald in the Zoom. Say, would students be interested to work on BARI projects if there was a way to earn credit or synthesize the work with their academic requirements? That, I think, to maybe put that in a statement, it's just like, as a student, to work with a research center like BARI, to do research at all, really, generally, is like this extra thing that doesn't always really mix at all with your actual requirements for your program. And might there be a way to make that easier?
I think they have mentioned incentives.
Yeah.
That's a direct connection there.
One barrier that I would identify is that with a quick scan of the conference program, there are no students among the main presenters. Many of the sessions are fairly interactive and students are welcome to attend, but a student cannot look at the presenters and see themselves represented there. And I think thinking back to past conferences, there have generally been examples of a postdoc presenting at the conference. I am not sure that I have seen even a PhD student presenting at the conference before.
Not even BARI researcher usually.
Right. And I think maybe it's not, maybe most undergrads and even, you know, first year master's students might not feel that they have something to present, but especially as the conference is structured as panel discussions, just because they don't have a body of work to present doesn't mean that they don't have anything to present. We talk a lot about representation being important in terms of race and gender and social class, but I think any group of people who you want to engage wants to see themselves represented before they engage.
I taught research methods to undergraduates last spring, and they all picked their own topic for what they wanted to, you know, develop some sort of research around for like their senior capstone. And some students are really interested in topics. One of the students is really interested in the Boston racial wealth gap and really wanted to help it. And I think that could be a way for BARI to kind of jump ahead, but a way for BARI to connect with students more, bringing in, you know, what are students interested in? What are their kind of research questions that they're asking, and how can we help as a conference refine those research questions that students are developing at an early age and research methods for like a senior capstone. but that barrier of like not getting to the next step of that sort of research. I want to turn this into a real project and not just a classroom project.
Like, I imagine you could probably like sort of list out like the set of programs that would have appropriate methods classes that are probably being taught by a current student at a PhD level to other students, and like that's sort of like a list of groups to reach out to. Like, hey, like, do you want to present just within this semester at this conference or something? Right? One thing I'll also be particular barrier is just specific time of year and semester scheduling. Just make sure it gets on the list, because I think time at this particular point of the year is a short supply for all the students.
Half the people in finals, the other half are not.
Exactly right. Yeah.
For me personally, the biggest barrier for me to get here was time. I commute from Rhode Island, so it took me about an hour and a half to get here. So if I wanted to attend the 8:30 conference, I probably had to get up at 5:30.
Do you have thoughts on like, remote options or any experience with that events that way?
Remote options aren't my favorite. I definitely wanted to be here to, connect with people and talk with people. And I'm glad I made the drive. But time and travel and energy, especially with gas prices, that's definitely there.
I have another follow-up from Joe, which kind of connects with a couple things you just said, which is for students working on real-world civic data problems in classrooms already, separate from BARI. So I think like BARI does a lot of this stuff, but we're not the only ones. If you're already working on that kind of space, but you're not doing it with BARI necessarily, whether it's in a class or you just have another opportunity to do so, it's not at all or how you would connect with BARI to a place that that's our main goal. So yeah, I think making that apparent, like if you have a project that you're already doing this work, you want to collaborate, especially if you're not a faculty or somebody who's like a natural kind of partner, and more somebody who's just like would be great, but just 4 years might go by and you might have missed the connection when it could have happened. But it's like, does that matter? Should that always matter?
Page 2.
We started to get into some of the wish listing.
Yeah, kind of.
What's the question after Barry?
Oh. Believe it or not, I used to be stage crew.
I sure you were rollerblading.
I've done a lot of things.
Like after when we thought of your biography, not title, would be from roller derby to the Eiffel Tower. Story can
That's good. That's good.
yeah, you can give it
No, I'll say.
credit. You can sign me.
So if the barriers and obstacles kind of where we've been or what's holding us back, then the next is kind of where we want to go as students with BARI conferences or BARI events. The discussion under this one is what kinds of resources or connections or information would help build meaningful and supportive relationships with BARI and the community of folks that you may have seen here today. So city people, community people, activists, residents, all the different people that attend BARI, the diverse groups. So resources, connections, information that would be useful to you or to us or to BARI to know to try to advance student involvement with the BARI conference and BARI events. of the barriers if we want to. Like, if we have a barrier, what's a solution to the barrier?
I like this idea that's been kind of brought up and maybe to make it more actionable would be about like literally building in some integration of BARI into specific programs or courses. Like I know I was thinking about the what's the class? Like Rebecca's like philanthropy class where they actually like learn about philanthropy and then like give money to organizations like after going through the process of evaluation and stuff. So I think like maybe BARI as this, you know, really valuable like cross-institutional network can help to bring those different parts together to bring the student in the classroom to the research to the practitioner. And so maybe kind of like starting there in the class would be a way to accomplish that.
I'd offer, I don't know what it is that the actionable piece would be, but just especially for students is just help with networking. It would be probably I'm part of BARI, so I'm not like feeling like I need to do that, but what other conferences I've been at, that is like the feeling you get. And obviously like there's a certain part of it that just like you have to just like talk to people, and that's fine too. But you know, just like having more structured opportunities or ways that like nudges people, especially students, to be like, oh no, come sit at this table. Like this isn't a table unless there's at least a student here. Like kind of just trying to have, especially for the professional career academics and others who know each other, are really experienced with networking, and kind of like know how to do it, to have awareness that there's a lot of people there who don't know how and are very intimidated, especially if they're like an undergrad and the expectation is like you have to be this tall to run this route basically.
Also be, you know, it's kind of intimidating when BARI has been around for 11 years, unless people can come to these conferences year after year after year and been around for quite a while and have this like deep connection with each other. But as a student coming to Northeastern, I've only been here a few years.
Yeah.
How do I break in? What sort of chapter really help me include me as part of that conference discussion?
Something that BARI does well in this regard, like doing meaningful work with community as a student is really hard because your life is sort of broken up into semesters. And the people in the community, like that's their life. Or if they work for a community organization or government, that's their career. And their career doesn't split itself up into full chunks. And I think that BARI maintaining a longer term relationship and having the ability to plug students in as they come and go to maintain that continuity gives students greater opportunity to meaningfully engage with the community than they would have without that structure that has more longevity. That is not something that every university does well.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool to have more open call opportunities like that, because I think from my experience of it, it's like a combination of like luck and self-selection. Like you have to like happen to get a research position with someone who happens to be doing a certain type of work. So it could be pretty difficult.
Joe asked on the chat for in relation to integration of BARI with the programs classes. There were specific ones in mind that would actually be. I don't know. That's that start.
You
Or if we had
mentioned-
as a collective might.
You mentioned Professor Ichio's class. But yeah, there's other things that we should definitely be tapping into. That's not bad.
I had a thought too, of just like when we're saying how there's no student presenters really. By the same token, it's also not really, I mean, it's mostly academic presenters. They might be practitioners, but they usually have a research presentation. It'd be really cool to see like policy or practitioner sessions and communities talking about an issue at the same standing. And there's no like expectation that they academify it, but like they have expertise on a given issue. It'd be really cool to hear a housing panel from people who are struggling with housing, people who have trying to advocate for housing, people who are like actually the people in the thing that we're studying and trying to help and trying to reach. I feel like that would be the most packed session. If those people were here next door, why would you not go there? Here they are. There's the community, right? So that's like pretty avant-garde for a conference because it's like very real and not like dressed up as a very kind of like formal presentation. But I think that's exactly what we're going for.
Sidebar, if any of you have ever been to or heard of the Allied Media Conference that happens in Detroit every year, it's a pretty rad conference and it's exactly what Sage was referring to. Like there's no pretenses of academifying it, and in fact it's flipped. So academics can go, but they're not the centerpiece. And if they speak in jargon, they're very quickly torn down to be like, say what you mean. What is that? Right? Like it's very like, we don't get it. So we'll just walk out of this room, like that kind of thing, which is cool. Like I think that that's cool. If like we're not speaking in ways that make sense, and yeah, totally walk out of my room, right? Like
What's it called again?
the Allied Media Conference.
I think the last point, I wonder if part of it, not just bringing in and talking to community, but also talking about student issues as well. Students being part of a larger community. Northeasterners, Boston's, Harvard students in Cambridge. Students have issues with housing or with access to transport or whatever sort of issue that students have. So maybe also including, what sort of issues are students in the area facing that are also, part of this year, this kind of the data that we don't have or data we collect with data being part of the student community and addressing student issues. It's a more holistic view.
Is BARI connected to grad student unions from the area?
Is it?
Not that I'm aware of, that the push for a grad student union at Northeastern was not successful.
MIT just unionized this semester after a super contentious election where, like, for one thing, like, the MIT faculty basically outlawed half of the people voting because of the funding source, even though they have the exact same responsibilities for the return funding. But, like, to the extent that there's student relevant issues, you really know what those are, I think. And their leadership works incredibly hard, so I can't say they have time for this, but on that topic, like they would know what student issues are generally. Yes, I think.
Maybe it comes full circle on the providing opportunities for students to get involved in community engagement and also like making those connections between students as a community and also students as part of larger Boston communities. I think there's very much the sense of like you step on the campus and you've left Boston. There's such a hard line between, I think like there's a conceptual hard line between like the school and the surrounding communities, but that of course is not the reality. And there's actually a lot of tension and a lot of negative impacts that we have on the areas around us. And I think certainly like I have found that a really engaging issue as a student, because it's like I'm part of this system that I know is doing these crappy things, but like weirdly, like I feel like it's not the part of my education to actually learn about those effects and relationships. So I think that might also be a place where art could kind of step in.
One more, this could be paying with too broad a brush, but I imagine that of the programs out there that have core structures that lend themselves to BARI, urban planning studios, who often involve working with community partners. Sometimes in not super critical ways. Sometimes a community partner is like a government agency that are not the community. But I think like there could be a role that to play, particularly for faculty who are looking to contextualize and nuance like how they think about community engagements. So again, one type of course that certainly all urban planning schools around Boston offer that could be an opportunity to bridge.
Also sometimes called a capstone.
Yes.
That was a field project.
I'm interested, I mean, I don't know if people here have actually interacted with BARI's data products or like, that's a great, that's probably. But that's one thing I always find is like, I have no ability to like perceive what that's like from the outside because like my program and working with BARI, like just have, I'm building those data products, so I'm using them, so it's just like I get like what they're for and what they're useful for. And we do community workshops and trainings and things like that to show what we have for data, maybe address specific questions or basically hear what people are trying to do and see if like we have something to offer them. It always has felt like it falls pretty far from like being helpful as much as like we literally do have useful data, but like from where they are to what we have still requires a lot. And we're talking about data all the time in this conference, but it also is sort of like what data, where we have it. And like only people who work in BARI really know what we're literally specifically referencing. It's a short list. It's like, it's like 12 different data sets. Like it's very specific, not just like everything. But could be more. Like I wonder, especially for people who in general aren't like doing a lot of data work, the relevance of all of that when they might not work with it. Or not just kind of, that to me is like the big thing. It's like on the inside of data and BARI, it's like our biggest strength. We have all this stuff, but from the outside, it's like, how do we actually bring other people into that asset? Or do they even need to? Or do we have thoughts on that? Like what that
I'd be worried about the scope creep that could create for BARI. Actually, my first instinct is like balancing off like the idea of like what value does BARI offer to students, how can that be broadened? Like, and then just kind of other than necessarily to like a bad scope, it's just like start trying to all student needs, they could like very easily over time staffers so like lead to less likely BARI should be trying.
I guess pose it a different way, like given that those in the room haven't used BARI's data, but just like thinking of any research center with data that does this, including BARI, but like what's the wish list version of that like makes it more useful or tractable or like relevant to their work, if you're not already doing data science, like all the well would definitely have.
Having led the data trainings for a while, I found that when we do community data trainings and we do data trainings in classrooms, and I found that community data trainings, people instinctively understand that data is important and maps are cool. And they enjoyed the training and they left having seen a neat thing that they've never used again.
Yeah.
And I think that it was a little bit different in classes because often we would go and do a presentation to a class in the context of this is a tool that you can use for a specific assignment that your teacher has assigned to you. And so it was maybe a little bit more useful in that context. But I think, like many things, one of the big ways that you can make it more useful is by providing examples of how it's useful.
Yeah.
So like when BARI does new data releases, I don't know if you still do this, but for a long time, there were like little mini projects that we write blog posts about like here's it, like, we have this new data, here's what I wanted to answer with it, here's the process I went through, here's the answer to the question. And like, they weren't big research projects, it was just like, this is a nucleation point that your mind can grab onto to figure out what your thing is that you're gonna do with this. And I think like putting the work into providing those examples to demystify what the data is for can bring people a long way towards figuring out how they want to use it.
And also just like how non-authoritative we are on it and the data is itself, like that it's an always iterating process. That just, what you just said triggered a memory in me when I was like first applying to this and I went on BARI and they did have a blog post that was like 3 paragraphs, basically just saying have a published data set, they realized there's something wrong with it. Here's how they fixed it. Here's how they found out about it, and here's what they did and fixed it, and this is what it now means. And I remember just being like so impressed, also like kind of intimidated of like just the level of like that communication and like they're but like impressed that like they're making this active effort to be like, look, we messed up, and then here's what we're working on. And then my trust in the data and the work they were doing was a million times greater because I knew that they were looking at it, communicating it, trying to make it transparent. And I think that we haven't really done that stuff as much recently, but yeah, I feel like making it as action, like that's what I always feel with what I always hope for from the data trainings and just in referencing that we had this is like a very simple asset we can provide anyone who's doing research or interested in approaching and solving a problem. I always was hoping that people would say, here's my question, here's what I kind of am like looking at. Okay, you have some data for that. And then that actually is a project that someone in BARI can then like work on. Like with them, but also like maybe it's like a lot of times it's super simple. They're just like, I would love if I could just identify X, Y, and Z, maybe like some of the things. And it's like we're doing that all the time, except we're just coming up with the questions. And if a community member came up with that question and we were able to give that to them, it's like so much cooler. And that's like my version of like how do we make it more accessible? It's like, look, maybe you're not a data science, or maybe you don't know. We're literally, there's like a team of people here who are just doing this stuff with their own data all the time. It's probably easier for us to run this basic approach that you're looking at least to start the conversation. I describe that as community-driven projects, suggestions, or like, like,
I think there are some wish list items around a couple of the obstacles that we haven't addressed. The informational one, in terms of how do we get the information? What's a good strategy or resource for things your students know about BARI going forward? And then I don't know if there's too much to be done about the timing of BARI during finals week. I wonder if there's some sort of long-term solution to integrating students better in terms of timing.
From a logistical perspective, the timing is there is no time that is good for everyone, including venues. I think that is a very good point that this may be a convenient time for faculty, but it is not for students. But I don't know that there is a great result that, especially given like other conferences and when other schools have finals and when like that's a sticky point.
Well, it would be a good time. Like if there was a good time for a student, like if you were running a student conference every year, when would you actually do it?
I would do it in the first half of the semester. Caveat that first semester timetable does not apply to all schools.
Yeah.
That. But yeah, I would do it after 2/3 semesters happen.
Which semester?
Either.
Yeah, just less crunch of like projects or assignments, and there just tends to be less in the first half compared to the second half.
Yeah.
When we have we have midterms, and then after midterms, students typically have papers or final papers and the final exam eventually. So.
And then to the extent that BARI could pursue kind of like the course partnership thing, because you're like, look at the courses completed the previous semester to tee up for the coming mid-semester conference or what have you. Natural cycles, like, oh, if you have partnerships with classes, research centers, kind of like we identify possible presenters or presentation activities based on work completed by students in the previous semester. Yeah.
Interesting.
I will say, when we did like the once a week thing, because it was like the beginning of COVID, and we just said like, it's really hard to do this all online, and so we're just like, well, let's just break up like the whole thing, like over after week with like different sessions, and it was the longest experience. It's like the endless conference. It's just like average. You're like, come to the BARI conference. That's still happening. It's 2 months. Like it just feels like forever. People are like just couldn't. And then it's also very, but like there was a helpful piece of it, which is that like when there was something you wanted to go to, you like very much could just focus on that one thing. But scheduling is always a battle.
I went a couple of years ago to a conference that was organized by Andrea Campbell. It was the Civic Leaders Summit, I think it was called. And it was similar in that it was all day, 1 day free in Boston. It was on a Saturday. And I think partly by merit of the fact that it was, organized by a city councilor with a lot of community connections, but partly because it was on a Saturday, the cross-section of people who went to that was very different than it would have been if it was on a weekday. That might lean more towards a community involving community than involving students per se.
About the informational kind of obstacle and barrier. I wonder when everyone like first heard of BARI or how to become aware of the BARI conference. Mine was cynical reason of dance since it's on my dissertation committee, but that might be the only reason I found out at that time. It might have been much later. So I wonder how that you started to know about BARI, how you became aware of it.
Yeah, my partner who one isn't in Boston much longer and two is like pretty heavily, it's kind of like public broadly, like put me in touch with cameras like sharing when you're planning emails initially for this. So it was a word of mouth thing, right? Which I always have to know something to do about it. Yeah.
For me as well, one of my professors, I was just talking with her about, what I want to do for careers and stuff like that. And she told me to, I recommend you go to this, check everything out here. And here I am.
So now you know what to do.
Yeah.
Well, so we have barriers and wish lists, but we do have a third discussion question. These are the barriers, and we kind of have a kind of goals of where we want to go, or what sort of useful things would allow us to build our experience better. Then how do we get there? What are the action items?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
This is kind of more about how BARI functions organizationally. Like, are there people that are like full-time staff at BARI who like are doing BARI stuff 9 to 5? Is it kind of like once a week? Like, what is the current set of resources or staff, time, power that can be brought to bear on this question currently?
Yes, we do have a program manager, David Brave, who was our his predecessor, and it's full-time staff, so we do have somebody there to facilitate just kind of all of the nuts and bolts of actually all the things we do.
Yeah.
And do outreach, communication, and
Yeah.
organization, and then we have faculty and several faculty
Yeah.
kind of partners, like Jim and others, and rotating list of PhDs, postdocs, and masters, and occasional undergrads. So there's the whole team is probably like ranges from 8 to 12 to so many people, and we do meet once a week. Yeah, there's a lot of capacity actually.
Okay.
We're mostly thinking about how we can do more things, like what else we can do. Always new things on the horizon if we've hit our bandwidth yet. Not really, just our personal
Yeah.
bandwidth. But
Because like a lot of the list I'm saying here is like giving someone or a few folks like your goal is to connect with like these schools and these programs. Like this gets divided up to which in my mind a series of action items or even like artifacts to produce. First two certainly are like the first one, integration part of the program. That's like someone being charged with like identify a list of programs to attach, you then follow up with that. Like the networking piece is going to be like maybe an artifact or like a tool or like a structured process design task. Yeah, like I think that the wish is actually not just like cleaning out either activities, which is their artifacts or outputs of an activity.
You can do that again.
Yeah, just like there's a few things in the wish list that involve like connecting to certain groups, and like that becomes kind of like outreach tasks against someone who has a task full time or someone full time can work towards regularly. Acknowledging that wish building takes time. That's like an ongoing process that can take years even. There's also a few things here to like suggest like design artifacts or like the output, right? So like it's help with network, that's either a process or kind of like a tool or like a workshop possibly, if it's examples of how the BARI data program can be useful, like that is some type of like artifact. I don't know if it would be a poster or like a brochure or like a video, like there's an artifact attached to that work process.
I feel like from the inside, like if I was just imagining, like the response to that is like, yes, we do need to do that, and we do try to do that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of I wonder if there's one thing would be helpful probably is also to do that list and make it more public, so people might not even realize that the professor or department they're in actually does have some relationship, and so that it's easier to figure out where we're missing, but also just so that not so inside baseball.
That's a lot of labor. That if you have a faculty that ostensibly has a connection, presumably it's like on them to advertise for you, right? So if you can like formalize like, hey, if you're part of this BARI research community, networking, at least passively throughout the semester, right? And again, like faculty have a lot to ask their time, so I get that you put it contentious, but like I don't know, faculty,
I'm just thinking of like making this public as in like BARI could step back and say, let's think about all the classrooms, departments, programs, things they're connected with, and just make that public so that when people go check out BARI, they can say, oh wow, we have this, oh that's that person, I know them. Like, sure, we are connected to so many things, and surely most people will be pretty close to one of those, or at least then know where they can start.
There's so many colleges in Boston that's not doing this mission.
We're connecting with them all, you mean?
Yeah.
I think our focus is more on within the university and then like active partnerships from the community and public and practitioners. I mean, like there are faculty connections between both. I don't know that we actually don't do that much like connecting with related programs like MIT Sense Lab or something like that. I mean, like we do, but like we also just simply operate kind of in parallel more than like you would think those would be our top collaborators, but it doesn't shake out that way.
I would say the conference is the place where everyone comes together, right? So BARI as an entity has an advisory board, like a lot of nonprofits do, right? And then it also has a conference committee. And at both levels, so there's some overlap. Sometimes one person might sit on both things. But there's also not overlap for some people, right? So one person might sit on one and not the other and vice versa. And those folks come from, like there's someone from MIT, there's someone from UMass Boston, there's someone from the U. Trying to think of other really strong, someone from Harvard, someone from Microsoft, there's someone from the city of Boston, several people from the city of Boston, from different agencies at the state level. So you actually get a mix of folks at the advisory or the conference committee level, where the reach is very broad.
I guess there is those exist, and that's someone who does the active like research part. Those are like just cloud level, like those don't come into the the active stuff as much. So in practice, it's still like when you end up working on a research project, it's still more likely to work with someone at Northeastern than calling up someone at Microsoft. But we do have those connections, and it would be cool to show that more easily.
And the conference is the place where they come together, right? So to the point of word of mouth and like how do we hear about these things? What are our connections? It is the conference point where you could have classes at MIT actually connected to this conference.
Yeah.
Or you could, there are classes at UMass Boston who are connected to this conference, like very specific researchers who bring their classes over, bring their advisees over this way.
Yeah.
But like to the point of like most people, I think will learn about BARI through word of mouth directly from a professor or the research group that they're working with or the student club that they're working, you know, like that's how you find out. It's not that like anybody's clamoring for BARI. Yeah.
But the conference committee is, would there be possibly like student representation, like a student ambassador to the conference committee, someone to sit on it, at least have a student presence in the room, these sorts of discussions.
I think that that's originally, I think the easiest way to do a student committee is to be like, all right, let's just find a student, put them on here. But that we wanted actually to convene this like group to say, is that the right way? Or would students really not have time for that or want to do that? Or, but that's totally a possibility.
It could even be like a rotating representative, not every student can go to every single meeting at the conference, but maybe a student can go.
I would almost think it would be more like a lot of the work of the process committee is reviewing session submissions and making sort of permanent decisions, which is like, I would almost think it would be more meaningful to have student representation on the advisory council, whether that's you know, a student from the BARI research team or otherwise, but like having student voices on that advisory council that sort of weighs in on like bigger picture decision making.
I would feel like both, right? Like for those, like we talked about like conference going, there's a lot of work that goes into pulling off who's the speaker at the session and how do we design the session. Garrett, I think you know firsthand, right, at least about designing this session. We had 4 meetings just designing 90 minutes. And so like, just imagine a full-on conference, right? Like what goes into that? So for those students who are interested in understanding those logistics, be it for academic society conferences where that is what academics do, or other professional conferences where that's what professionals do. Like to have a leg up on that is a valuable resource if you want, right? Like no one has to do any of these things, but like if you want to learn how to do it, it's kind of a nice thing, like a nice skill set to learn. How do you pull together a conference? What does that mean? So having those possibilities, both, I think they're really good ideas.
One thing that I would identify, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but my experience looking at how people ended up on the BARI research team, there's a very strong pipeline. Be an urban student, take big data for cities, probably TA for that class and wind up on the research team. So like there is that pipeline, but if you aren't part of that pipeline, or maybe like you take big data for cities with someone other than Dan, this is not the only one who teaches it. Like, I wonder if that pipeline to being a student researcher at BARI could be expanded.
Was that a wish list or an action?
I don't, it's an observation and I don't know how big it is.
That might build off of the first point of hygiene, the courses and faculty that are in space that could be provided potential for that sort of pipeline.
Right, so maybe be explicit with teachers who are sort of considered friends of BARI, professors who are considered friends of BARI, that there is this pipeline to get students. I mean, part of it is like a job doing something relevant to your studies.
Well, as part of that pipeline, like the way that one goes from that class into the BARI, it's like pretty much from the project you work on. You're working with our data, you're basically, without knowing it, you're doing a trial run.
Yeah.
Working with our data, working with Dan, or at least someone who's senior in BARI and knows all about BARI. You're exploring a question in Boston, and then you complete a project. And are also like modifying the data set, improving the data set. So at the end of it, there's like basically a list of candidates, and you know, it's not as like transparent as it could be. And I think that there's probably 10 other classes on campus, if not 20, 30, that are producing projects that are very similar in caliber, would be also a great fit, probably diversified with those. And if the students there, you know, including the big data for city students, if they do like, oh, like this is a way that I can kind of work with BARI, probably would, you know, think about their research a little differently. But that's a really good point. That's like the bulk of people who are just like masters or undergrad students before they float in. That's how they. Oh, I did this project. Oh, that's great. Why don't you keep working on that?
Really sort of between BARI conference student networking. That's something useful or potentially like another meeting of a committee like this, further hammer these things out, figure out a relationship with the BARI conference. Would that be something that would be useful going forward?
As far as, making BARI public, to increase awareness, I get emailed all the time about internships and jobs, yet I never got that same email about BARI. I had to get that email from another professor. So, those type of emails or even letters of intent, would be very effective in increasing awareness of BARI.
Sage, do the weekly BARI meetings still generally include someone giving a presentation on things that they're working on?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's something that could be made more public or taken out of the weekly team meetings and put more in a context where, like, PhD students will often have like a formal way to practice defending their thesis in front of other PhD students and get feedback. I wonder if there's a way to remove decouple that sharing about research projects from a weekly team meeting and putting it in front of more students.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, especially because it also is the perfect audience you want to hear from, which is the students actually in BARI of all levels, showing what we do.
Right. It's the
As
same.
it's happening.
It's similar to the blog post, just like
Yeah.
one example.
That's something we already do that doesn't take like extra effort. Like you do the whole thing and then you write a blog post about it is the extra thing. But it's like we're presenting what we're working on, something that we anticipate and do regularly. And then a lot of people do. And it also accelerates the communication too, because you're not waiting until that PhD student has completed the dissertation. At which point it's like affiliation with BARI is less relevant. You're seeing it in the moment. Pretty cool. Basically like taking like the last half an hour of our meetings and making it public, or even just recording it and sharing it, something like that. Inviting people to comment to it.
Or even just doing those, 2 presentations every other week that are separate from those meetings.
Yeah. That works.
I don't have Facebook or Instagram or any social media.
It's Twitter.
There's a newsletter as well.
Twitter, there's a
That's
newsletter.
the newsletter. Yeah, stuff like that.
Well, why not Facebook and Instagram?
There's a long convoluted explanation as to why not Facebook. I think there's some stuff on LinkedIn as well. The Facebook explanation has more to do with different accounts getting deleted and people having access to them, and like it's an administrative story, not a communications decision story.
Okay.
But I think BARI is pretty active on Twitter.
How many students are in BARI?
Like I said, it would be like anywhere between like 6 and 12, something in that range. I mean, the last 2 years, it's ranged like that. I'm not sure.
Where, sorry, it's not really a weird kind of thing. It's not quite so where are they? Why aren't they here?
Well, we're all around hiding.
A lot of them are the ones like you checked in with downstairs and like they're
Oh,
operating
okay.
campus.
Yeah, they're up there in the Ivory Tower. We might not have, I think you have keys, sorry.
Yeah, it's a feedstock.
You see somebody with this very thin red line around
Oh,
their
that's
back?
the student.
This
Okay.
is how you get to the Ivory.
Okay.
I mean, that's another piece of it though, right? Is that if our students who are actually affiliated with BARI are working the conference and not attending and presenting, then how are they hooking their friends? How are they hooking just people they know? How are they hooking their peers and classmates? They're not, because they're working it.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to actually participate in a session earlier, just because I had just taken a class and we we're going to do a session related to that class.
Yeah.
And that was the best part of the conference for me, and by far my main excitement for this was not that I was going to be running around, but also getting to be a part of it. It was so much more. Yeah, it felt like we're really doing it. You know?
Yeah.
It wasn't a big thing. It's being involved.
Yeah.
But it's true. I feel like I'm half present just because of the nature of what time is it? Where do I have to get? It's hard
To be clear, it is worth naming that this conference, as it presently exists, would be completely impossible without the students that are operating it.
Yeah.
So it would be a big shift
Right.
to have them not have to do that.
Yeah.
I would also argue that it's not, as someone who's sat on the conference committee for several years now, we can pull from other networks. We're a conference committee, we could do it ourselves, right? We're strong, a team of 10 strong. So why be in the spotlight all the time if you can give out name tags and free up the student to actually experience the conference? I think that's an argument we could make.
Or at least do it in shifts. So
Yeah,
that,
right?
Well, the next session is the first one where I'm not doing it. So I'm which one do I want to go? But I don't mind. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it actually is enjoyable in its own right too, to be a part of it and also see how it all comes together. But yeah, I mean, having it be so if I, for example, just didn't make it today, or any one of us didn't, it would have been a huge problem. We don't have backup.
I'm mindful of time, and as you can hear from the hallway, we've got about 5 minutes left in the session. Thoughts, Garrett, on how to wrap up?
Well, since this is a student planning committee, we do need student involvement and I guess kind of volunteerism going forward in terms of higher time to commit to talking with each other and thinking about these issues. We do have a Google form, correct? Kim? Or do we have some other sorts of collecting information? That's okay.
Well, I have everyone's information mostly. But let's just pass around a paper. Let's do a good old pass around a paper. We can go analog if we need to. We're just do like a named email, which is our method of following. That's basically what the Google form would ask for.
Ideally, it'll match the one you used before.
Oh yeah, and if you happen to be graduating, hopefully it's an email that people will fill out.
Yeah, I never know how that works.
I still use my Brandeis email and I graduated in 2020.
Yeah.
They don't take that.
I don't think I will.
Yeah, really?
Thank goodness, because I have a lot in there.
I know, especially now that all the emails connect to Google Drive, and without needing to, suddenly you have an entire repository,
Yeah.
and then you're like, wow, really?
Don't cut me off.
Every once in a while, I'll get an email like, "You're still using this?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, yes." Like, I didn't see that. I know. I need to not have that system. I get it. Yeah. But then my life goes on, and I don't worry about it.
It's kind of responsibility when I say it was a hot mess.
Yeah.
Wait, 50?
I made the choice. An email goes through.
It's an email and a thing goes ding. Morning meeting.
Same stuff. The next session does begin at 2:30, although I'm sure that will be.
This is a matter of what will we do with these things? I'm gonna take these, I think Dan, David, and I will probably have a conversation about the outcomes / these outputs
Yeah.
of this meeting. We'll obviously follow up with folks via email, and if there's anybody on the Zoom who wants to share their email, we could probably capture that through Sage. And yeah, we'll do like a round of follow-up. I'm assuming though that since we're at the end of the school year, we won't follow up till not fall, but like pre-fall, because everyone's going on summer. So
Yeah.
I think that that's just appropriate. So be on the lookout as school wraps up again for what does it look like for next steps.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks for joining. Good to meet you all. Good to meet you in person. Good to meet you in person.
Yeah.